I'm gonna reroute the thermo drive.
Electronic mail failure. Stored forever in a virtual library.
Computers can't swim.
They can now.
The data termites, the website, it's alive! Movies and mainframes.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Movies and Mainframes, the podcast that is going to explore and discuss the representation of technology in media. I am your host, Andy, and with me today, my guest is Sean Sebring. How you doing today, Sean?
I'm doing pretty good. So happy to be here. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, absolutely. For our listeners, if you don't already know, Sean co-hosts another SolarWinds podcast called Tech Pod. And they were nice enough to have me on last year as a guest. And that was the first time I've really talked to you, Sean, and had a really good time on the podcast. And so, of course, I asked you to be on this podcast. And here you are today. First of all, thanks for joining me. And for our listeners, Sean, if you wouldn't mind, besides hosting Tech Pod with Crystal Taylor, which our listeners should already know, she's been a guest several times. Give us the elevator pitch. What do you do? What is your journey through technology?
So my first embracing of technology was when they were still putting out the AOL discs for internet. And there was this game on PC called King's Quest, I believe is what it was called. Very, very old school game, right? And it was a kid's game, right? Maybe, but not many kids had access to computers. I think it was probably a $2,000 computer that was slower than molasses, but that was the hot thing at the time. So this was super early 90s. But that was some of my first exposure, but I really enjoyed it. And it gave me fun memories of being on a computer and playing game and solving puzzles with my dad. And that led into more and more exposure to games and computers. I think my very first PC game I owned for myself could have either been the original Baldur's Gate games, which was 5 discs, or it was StarCraft for the PC. StarCraft by Blizzard Entertainment. And that actually triggered my entrance to the professional realm of IT, where I was a game master for Blizzard Entertainment. My first job was an electrician. My first true job where I had to report on taxes was Cracker Barrels and an electrician. And then as soon as I got the chance to take a pay cut from $12.50 an hour to $8, I was like, it's worth $4.50 an hour to an 18-year-old to go work at Blizzard Entertainment. And it was a blast. So I supported video games with Blizzard Entertainment for about 5 years and some change. And that was really a support role, right? Which is very relative to IT. So we're not just talking about supporting players in the games, but moving into account and technical support, where someone talks you through, hey, this it's not loading the game. I'm receiving this error, which also means you become slowly an expert at Googling, right? And that's also a very powerful tool to anyone in the technology realm. So after that, I moved into a service desk role for the state of Texas. Contracting to the state of Texas. So I ended up becoming a workforce manager and then the supervisor for the IT help desk for Department of Transportation of Texas. Did that for a few years, moved to an insurance company, ran their service desk. And that's where I became the administrator for a tool now owned by SolarWinds called SolarWinds Service Desk. So a lot of my history is around managing and implementing service management practices, implementing a service desk, right, starting from nothing up to, working in an enterprise, large organizations. And so it's been a fun journey. My expertise is obviously in service management with ITIL. So I'm an ITIL managing professional and strategic leader, just to kind of flex some credentials to, one or two nerds out there that may care or even know what that means. But yeah, it's been a really fun journey. So it's still very much into technology, movies, video games. And I couldn't be happier working at a technology company. So
nice. And I didn't know this about your background, but your work within the video game industry perfectly fits into what we watched today. And listeners, what we watched today is 2009's Gamer, directed by Neville Dean and Taylor, and starring, of course, Gerard Butler. It also has Ludacris, Amber Valletta, Terry Crews, John Leguizamo shows up in this movie, and then a bananas performance by Michael C. Hall, a.k.a. Dexter. Yes, let me read a quick synopsis here, and we will jump right into our discussion. It says, each week, Cable, played by Gerard Butler, a death row inmate, battles his fellow prisoners in a violent online game called Slayers, his every move controlled by a young gamer's remote device. To the players, Cable and the other inmates are just simulated characters, but to a resistance group that opposes the game's inventor, Cable is a critical component of their plan to end the inventor's form of high-tech slavery. Yes. Yeah. So all that to say is that Gerard Butler is an inmate, and a player on the outside can control him, among many others, to the death in a like online PUBG battle royale. And this movie is, let's get into it. This movie is bonkers.
We start there, just intense. Yeah. I think one of the things you commented on, you sent some notes over just to have us prepare, but the opening song, Marilyn Manson cover of Sweet Dreams, or so,
yes.
And you know what? It's so funny because immediately going into the film, and then as it continues, I'm like, it did have vibes of The Matrix, right? We're being controlled. There's a simulation, right? There's even like a bad guy that's at the head of it, but and a resistance group on the outside trying to extract you from it. So very much Matrix vibes there. But the costume design, the music, I was like, they missed this by 10 years. Like it was just like, it was more 90s than The Matrix, which came out in the 90s, 99. But, it was like the people were like not ready to let go of the grunge scene of the 90s when they came out with this. So it gave me very big, what is it? Escape from LA vibes, Escape from New York vibes. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. No, I'm so glad you brought that up because I became weirdly like fixated on when the opening credits, listeners, when the opening credits happen, the Marilyn Manson song is playing, and I became weirdly fixated by it because by the time this movie came out in 2009, this song was already 15 years old.
Mm-hmm.
It's old. So it's and besides the line in the Eurythmics song of, some people want to use you, some people, like, okay, sure, that fits in thematically, but I just couldn't help but think, like, it's just so weird. It's a 15-year-old song that it's like doing a movie now and like opening it up with Holla Back Girl by Gwen Stefani. It's just like, wait, are you going for a specific vibe? And I would argue, like, it just, like, and I, just because I don't listen to that type of music, I just automatically think like, oh, this is going to be a Hot Topic movie. This is just going to be Jared Leto's The Joker. Just like, okay, this is the vibe or whatever. Because I was like, just do a remix of the original because it's already electronic-y sounding, and you can make it more 2009. But anyways, I just became weirdly fixated on like, why'd y'all choose Marilyn Manson?
I really think that the era of vibe they were going for had to have been around mid-90s too, because another film that came into my head looking at the costume designs was Fifth Element, right? Fifth Element's design on the futuristic clothing, like they were walking around with the incredibly short halter tops made of weird materials, the stretchy rubber gloves on the hands with the rubbery spikes, like very 90s. And I'm like, it really didn't fit at the end of the early the 2010 era is 2009, but it really didn't quite fit in there, and it was just so strange to see that. But yeah, I mean, it caught me off guard. And the Marilyn Manson, to your point, that song's also a cover of an even older song. So
yes,
very, very odd.
No, but you nailed it with that 90s aesthetic, because whenever in this movie they have that that sim game Society that Michael C. Hall's Ken Castle's character created. Everybody in that is wearing like what you would typically see in a 1995 rave movie with
raves, big time.
Yeah, and so you nailed it. It's people hanging on to the 90s, and Yeah, it's a strange aesthetic, but
yeah, it
no,
was.
of course not. But
Put it in a weird place because we were at that era where it was almost a call to Call of Duty in the sense of like how much people are into
yes,
shooters and things like that. So it had a call towards the military fighting shooting PUBG style games, which is very far away from the mid 90s and that aesthetic. So it was strange because I knew where it was going when I rewatched it, and I was like, why did they choose that aesthetic, that punk and rave vibe going on? Because again, throughout the film, you'll see them as characters you're meeting throughout, or as Gerard Butler's character moves from place to place. They do travel through raves, right? They travel
yeah,
through different scenes of a rave taking place, and it's really odd stuff. Again, very 90s, where there was experimentation with oddities in America, especially. So
yeah. So Sean, you chose to talk about Gamer today. What is your relationship to Gamer? Like, did you see it in the theaters? Have you seen it recently? Like, talk to me about
so
that.
a cheating answer, which it's not false, is that my wife and I really enjoy a Gerard Butler film. And it's not necessarily any tribute to Gerard Butler. It's, there's a few people like this. Gerard Butler plays Gerard Butler. He
Yes.
could have been the exact same without changing his character at all in Olympus Has Fallen. In Law
Yep.
Abiding Citizen, he's actually in prison there, getting ready to not break out but seek justice. It's Gerard Butler playing Gerard Butler. There's many like that. Like Denzel's very good at playing Denzel. Bruce Willis really only played Bruce Willis. So we just
Right.
decided and latched on, we're Gerard Butler fans. But for the fact of us talking movies and mainframes today is, one, I'm a gamer. So I can relate to this, and AI has been such a fun topic coming up. This doesn't quite go into AI, but it goes into the scariness of what technology can do. Because this was like biotech, right? Stuff that goes into
Right.
your nervous system, your brain cells. But it's like the role that technology plays and what's going to change and shape society. And AI has been really at the forefront of that in a lot of my recent conversations. Again, this wasn't quite AI, but it was a take on how technology and our perception of what reality should look like is going to change the way that society acts as a whole. And right, you called out one of them, which again, for listeners who haven't seen it, there's two things happening in this. It's the kingpin of it, our Dexter, right? He has created two games which rely on the same technology, and it's controlling the nervous system of real people. One was like a Sims. You get to have a character which is another person that could be paid to act for you, right? And you control them. Or maybe they're a prisoner, like we called out before. But you control someone like The Sims, and that's society, right? And that game's already there. It's just we're not controlling people. So what if, right? And then the other one is more of like your PUBG style, where instead of you just picking a character from a small roster, it's always the same characters. You're picking a real life prisoner, controlling them, right? And again, same technology. So like both games already exist. And so it's really a what if of controlling people was there. And we're actually really close from what I've seen in some recent technology of being able to put things into maybe read minds and kind of read what's happening, or see what movements are taking place based off of the electrical signals happening. But it seems a little closer than it is far away. And so, of course, society's not right there. But who knows what the stepping stone is going to be to change society.
Yeah. So let's talk about this technology, because in the movie it's presented that it is a single nanocell that they implant into the motor cortex of the brain. That cell then replicates and replaces the cells surrounding it, and these copied cells contain remote access functionality.
IP
And they refer to it as the nanex because
Yeah.
it's the nanocell plus the cortex
Right.
equals the nanex. And this is what allows an outside user to control someone and their motor functions. And also that these nanocells have they can transmit and receive. So even if you're not controlling their body, they're still acting as like a body cam, basically. You're seeing and hearing everything that they're experiencing. That every human that undergoes this procedure has their own unique, basically, IP address, and that they say that control of the individual is localized to the gaming environment. So if you are an quote unquote actor in society, you can only be controlled once you go into, a certain zone where it's the control is given. Same thing with the slayers, with the prisoners. They, so to speak, you're not supposed to be able to control them at their home or outside these zones, but they have to be in those areas for control to be relinquished. Yeah. Oh, and so I just want to point out Ken Castle, that's the person who invented this technology. It's Michael C. Hall. Okay. So he says in the movie that all the revenue that Slayers brings in, because we see in the movie Slayers is huge. They have that whole montage of all the advertisement in Times Square all around the world. There's even advertisements projected onto the side of the Great Pyramids. It's the biggest thing in the world. That the revenue that Slayers pulls in, it actually funds the prison system. It has been approved by the federal government and approved in a vote by 68% of the voting public, which Kara Sidgwick's character, she plays a talk show host, interviewer, and she even brings up that election or that vote, that there was questions of voter fraud, of digital manipulation. So they're already talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and one other thing I want to point out, because whenever this movie opens with a Slayer battle, there's, like, the lack of a better term, there's these NPC people.
Oh, yeah.
Going through motions and everything, and they actually address that. They call them genericons, but they're basically NPCs, and they are prisoners that have not controlled by anybody, but they are injected into the game with pre-programmed motions. So that's why they're doing random things while the gunfight's going on, because if they can survive one game without being killed, they are set free. If you are a Slayer actually being controlled after 30 wins, which no one has ever done, they will be granted a pardon.
Butler.
Exactly. But yes, I agree with you. I'm a huge fan of Gerard Butler. Not so much his movies, but his movies always hit this spot where it's just like, it's perfect. That's all I want to watch right now. I can watch Geostorm or,
that's one.
yeah, Raina. Actually, I mean, he has plenty of movies that I actually truly enjoy, but a majority of them are just like, great. I get to turn off my brain and just have some fun. But I do love, I love Rain of Fire. I love Den of Thieves. Those are pretty actually good movies. But movies
Rain of Fire has such quality in its unique lack of quality that I love it so much.
Yeah.
And the names in it are actually surprisingly really big. Maybe at the time these guys were all getting their start, but you go back and you look at the cast in Rain of Fire and you're like,
yeah, if you got Christian Bale and Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, you got McConaughey, and they're, they had to get some kind of approval to talk about Star Wars. Star Wars is implemented in their storytelling in this. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it was just like a really big cast. Yeah.
So let's talk about the video game element of this, of Slayers. So real quickly, you'd already mentioned you're a gamer. Are you still do you still currently play games and everything?
As much as my family allows me, which isn't very much anymore. But when and where I can, just to kind of divulge what my favorite game is and was, I was a Blizzard fanboy for the longest time. Of course, Blizzard has transformed a couple times. It's Activision Blizzard was the first one, I believe, circa 2011. And then Microsoft acquired Activision Blizzard, I want to say within the last 5 years at least. I'm not that close to it anymore. But World of Warcraft, one of my absolute favorites. So we're talking about an MMO game, one that's persistent. So I do love my video games. I don't really play it anymore at all. I tried to come back and play Classic. They had this hardcore version, which if you can imagine playing World of Warcraft where your whole goal is to die and wipe and get stronger, didn't work out well. I went through about 20 characters that died, and I was like, why am I doing this to myself?
Yeah.
Nostalgia hurts, you know?
Yeah.
But no, I do love my video games. There's a few things on Steam I still play. I'll play a mobile game on my phone because I can sit on the couch next to the family and still try and entertain myself. But part of it is a thing of the past.
Right. So you pretty much exclusively stick with PC games?
Yeah, the only console that I really still continue to touch is the Nintendo's. So I've got the Switch. And again, I was able to justify that because it's a console that you can pick up. And so I was able to, take it on the couch or take it on a plane if I have to travel. And it has more kid-friendly stuff. So good with the family. My daughters watch me play through the Zeldas. So my Nintendo Switch Online, you can get the classic Ocarina of Time, play through that, then the Breath of the Wild. And so good stuff there. A little bit more family-friendly and good for party nights, too. They've got great multiplayer games where you can pass the console around or sign in with your phone. And Jackbox, if you've ever heard of Jackbox, is a really fun one. Trivia games and stuff. So good fun. But yeah, so still connected to games, not as much as I used to be. Maybe a little more once kids are in their middle school years, but not for now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I've always been a console gamer. I love my Switch, and I currently have a PS5, but yeah, starting with a TI 99, going all the way up to now. But yeah, I barely got into PC gaming because I want to say because my parents, whenever we got a computer, but back in the day, they were insanely expensive whenever you wanted to, finally do it. And so they were like, absolutely not. You're not installing games, even though you could buy them in a store in a package, shrink wrapped. They just thought like, no, it's somehow going to ruin the computer. Yeah. And so I always had to stick with consoles. So I just always stuck with consoles. I never really got into PC gaming. My extent to PC gaming is like playing Scorched Earth with a friend or something like that. Nothing, or a Doom LAN party. That's about it.
Yeah. That was a classic. But to your point, they were so expensive. Isn't that bizarre that like you can go get a laptop computer for half the cost of a computer you could get in the early 90s, and the capabilities of that technology is so vastly different. Some things have changed, right, in inflation and what's expensive. I never expected technology to go in that direction. Happily, it did. But, I remember working at CompUSA, if you've heard of that. It was like...
I worked at CompUSA, too.
No kidding. Yeah, so I worked at a...
First job, yeah.
I worked at a CompUSA, bright red shirts, yep. And I remember when I was working there is when the 500 gigabyte hard drives were really starting to like... That was a sign that you were taking computing seriously if you could afford and install one of those. And they were so expensive. I want to say like $700 for a hard disk, 500 gigabyte. And I could be messing up the numbers, but like now you don't even want a hard disk. You don't want a hard disk, and you can get 2 terabytes, in a chip or a solid state. And so it's just the way that costs have changed. It's just mind blowing. What the value of technology has done as far as how much we need it, and that fortunately it's a little more affordable now. A lot of technology is a lot more affordable now, but it's got to be at all of our fingertips. So, not surprised.
Okay, so this technology with the nanocells and controlling the body, whole time I'm watching it, I can't help but think of Neuralink and all the articles that I'm reading about that. So I want to ask you. I'm going to put us on the spot. This technology that's presented in the movie, with not only but hearing and seeing what the person is experiencing, but actual remote control of their body. Can you think of any use case that is beneficial, not for nefarious purposes? And specifically, it's the remote controlling of the body, because obviously, sending and transmitting audio visual information. I can think of plenty of use cases for that could be beneficial in the medical field or in law enforcement or things like that. But the actual control of somebody's body, anytime I'm like doing the thought experiment of like, what would that be?
Yeah,
there's no use case that isn't for,
nefarious
bad
purposes.
deeds. Exactly. And
The
so,
only
yeah,
that does come to mind, I suppose, would be, again, similar to the ones you'd said already for even the AV, is emergency response. Sometimes there's situations where someone's stuck, or maybe they're in such a state of panic they can't move or operate correctly. So literally only emergency response situations, I think of, like someone being stuck in a cave or trapped in a room, something like that, where there's someone who knows what to do to get out, but the only way is from access from the inside, right? Aside from emergency response situations, like there's not really many use cases because we already have other means of remote control, not needing someone's hands and fingers and their ability to act for us.
Right.
Like we already have that kind of remote because most interactions is through technology already anyway. So in what scenario would I need some person? And really the only thing I can think of is emergency response.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Emergency response, like in the, what you always see in the movies, like, oh, the pilot is passed out, and
Exactly.
hey, well, we can put a pilot in control of a passenger, something like that. Yeah,
Exactly.
okay. Well, there's one. We found one use case, but everything else is like, oh no.
Yeah. No, and Gamer does a really good job of kind of highlighting the grotesqueness of what people would be capable of. So if you're interested, just embrace the fact that it dwells on the dark side of humanity and what they would likely do with the power and possession of this kind of technology.
No, absolutely. One thing that really surprised me about this movie, because I saw this movie when it came out on video for the first time and rented it, and I haven't seen it since. All I remembered from it was the core concept and some of the cast. Yeah. And rewatching it, one of the things that I was really surprised about is that this movie is only 90 minutes long.
Yeah.
And they fit in so much stuff, and they fit it in a way where everything is pretty much clear cut. There's bows tied at the end of every subplot that they bring up. It's a very tight movie, and because not only do they talk about slayers, but they introduce that concept of society, of the Sims-like game. But then there's the conspiracy surrounding Gerard Butler's character, and also the whole wife and daughter subplot. And to fit all of that stuff within 90 minutes, they do a pretty good job.
I think it would have behooved them to have an extra 30, because there were a couple that I wanted. So one character you don't see enough development in is Simon, the kid who's controlling Gerard Butler, right? And one of the things that they're trying to highlight, which again they don't spend enough time on, but you kind of get it, is from the person controlling, you don't sense that you're controlling another human, right? So it's, I don't remember what that effect is called, but it's similar in military when you're controlling a drone and the drone is deploying missiles. You can't feel, see, or be a part of the destruction that's doing, right? So it desensitizes you to it. And
when I was watching this, I kept thinking of Ender's Game as well.
Very much so. That's a very good relation to it, which in Ender's Game, just for listeners who aren't familiar, they use children with bright, very capable minds to control what should happen in war simulations, except what we don't know is they're not actually simulations. Spoiler alert, but it's been out for a long time and it's a book. It's quite old. So
yeah,
I don't feel too bad.
The 70s or something, yeah.
But it's the same thing, is like they're able to act dispassionately when they didn't know it was real. And so they were able to make the most effective decisions in those scenarios. But they're so disconnected. And this did similar by showing that this 17-year-old boy who's controlling Gerard Butler thinks of it as just a game. Hey, let me control you. What are you doing? And this guy's like, I'm fighting for my life, right? And so trying to bridge the gap between the guy controlling the human and the human feeling, I'm still human. They didn't quite get enough in that. But where I was going with this is his story. there was a little bit of character development for the boy starting to realize, okay, this guy's a person. He wants out, but he's also concerned about his own success and fame because he's the number one player of this game, Slayer. Towards the end, they give us a little bit of heroic moment for him because Gerard Butler's being controlled by Castle, because Castle can control anybody he unveils towards the end. He's being controlled by Castle, and the only way to fight Castle all the way is if someone else is giving similar inputs to what Gerard Butler wants. So this kid Simon's also thinking of getting revenge against Castle, and that's two minds against one now. So I feel that that's the way they were able to overpower Castle. That and Gerard Butler got in his head and said, if you're controlling us, I want you to picture yourself getting stabbed.
Yeah.
It was kind of nice. It was kind of good validation towards the end of like, you're not really in control. But yeah, there was a little bit there of, I wanted to see a little more for this boy. Like what did the person on the outside finally feel and realize when they were like, man, I shouldn't have been in control, or this was very inhumane of me.
Yeah, no. No, I completely agree. This movie for me, it is enjoyable, but it does this for me, the sin of going middle of the road. I would have enjoyed this movie if it went one or two ways. One, if the subject matter was treated more heavily and with more care, and real attention went into the script. I'm specifically thinking of like if Denis Villeneuve was making Gamer and the kind of production that would, because there's so much that you could explore with the psychological impacts of being controlled that they barely just touch on, where how messed up it must be that you are responsible / not responsible for the murder of hundreds of people week to week.
Yeah.
But not only that, but just like how that affects society, on the outside, not just Gerard Butler's character. Or I would have liked it if it went in the opposite direction of just balls to the wall, stupid, ridiculous fun.
Yes.
Like, don't even need subplots of conspiracies or wives and children, of just a guy trying to get to that 30 win mark so he can get out.
What is that movie where it's first person?
Hardcore Henry.
Hardcore Henry. That's kind of that balls to the wall, just a mission. You don't really get a lot of context. You don't really get any wrap up of any plot. Well, you do a little bit, but at the same time, it's that more balls to the wall of just action.
It's a fun ride, yeah.
Here's a run, literally a run.
Which I'm surprised that this movie isn't more like that, because the directors of this movie, I said Neville Dean and Taylor, but it's two people, and they directed Crank and Crank 2, Crank High Voltage. And have you ever seen the Crank movies?
I have, and Jason Statham is another one that I was talking about, how Gerard Butler plays Gerard Butler.
Yeah.
Statham plays Statham. We also just recently watched Meg 2, and wow.
No, I'm kicking myself because I still haven't watched The Beekeeper. But it's like, what am I doing? I need to go and rent that movie. I'm just waiting to watch it. No, I'm the same way. Anytime Jason Statham shows up, it's like, oh yeah.
Handsome
watch it eventually.
Handsome Rob.
But they directed the Crank movies, and those movies to me are balls to the walls, ridiculous, just going for it. And seeing their names attached, I would assume it would just be a little bit more in that direction. But they kind of go in the middle of the road where it is crazy, but also like, oh, hey, let's take our foot off the gas for a second and explore
and make you think a little bit about
and I just don't think either they weren't given the time and resources to explore that more. I'm not going to say they're not capable of handling that kind of material, but they have 90 minutes to do it, so something has to suffer. And I think that's the only reason why this movie suffers, is because they either didn't have enough time or they just didn't go full tilt.
Watching it did make me think it would be nice to revisit it now, 15 years later, because there's also Ready Player One that came out, which is a much, much, much more PG version of almost the same thing where video games take over the world. But it's more of your preteen aspect of what it would look like, where it's a video game world where it's not as physically violent and people aren't being controlled, but same vibe of society is run by games. And there's the haptic aspect where you're in the game and you feel what happens in the game. It's, again, not as dramatic where there's people killing people that same way. But I think that it would be really cool to see if they could take everything in this and then add that extra 30% that we were missing, just to help us explore the psyche part a little bit more, the repercussions part a little more. And you mentioned one thing about them tying the bows and the conspiracy. As it ended, because I rewatched it again recently myself, Castle's character, what's his name again?
Michael C. Hall?
Michael
Or are
C.
you
Hall.
talking about?
Michael C. Hall's character. I feel like at the very end, they want you to realize that he was just a puppet the whole time. And the reason I say that is because as he dies at the end, there's his team, his squad, who's always with him. He's actually never in a scene, I don't think, without his squad of geeks.
Right.
And they're there with basically iPads, but they're like hologram style iPads, right? Futuristic look. And they're always helping execute his orders. Well, when he dies, they stand up with zero emotion in their face and they start to walk out. Gerard Butler stops them and says, "Hey, it's just one click to you. Can you turn off the Nanics?" And they say, "Okay, well done, gamer." And they click and it's off, right? So the whole time they were actually in control, since the Nanics was what was running the whole show. If all it took was just one click from them, I feel like it was symbolic that his character actually wasn't in control the whole time. He was the puppeteer and the final boss of the game, right? And that's what Gamer was, is can you beat the final boss of the game? Maybe it was one big experiment. Maybe it was a political puppet show. Who knows? But I did think that there was something else there that they wanted to leave you without an answer on so you could think about it.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I actually didn't glean that from that ending, but that makes perfect sense. And I like the movie a little bit better now. Because and it does make perfect sense, because one of the things towards the end that I was not expecting was Michael C. Hall's Sammy Davis Jr. "I Have You Under My Skin" musical / fight number. And the whole time he's doing that, he is acting like a puppet. He's taking on that posture of a marionette the whole time and everything. And he's obviously lip syncing. So, that makes a lot of sense. And it's so dumb putting it in the context of a game. Of course he would be the final boss.
Yeah.
And so, that's pretty cool. One thing I will say about his death, where, so listeners, at the end, Michael C. Hall and Gerard Butler are both struggling with a knife, and Michael C. Hall's, about to just puncture Gerard Butler, but Gerard Butler gets in Michael C. Hall's head and says, "I want you to picture that knife going into you." And it's, all manifesting in Michael C. Hall's head. And so the knife, he's relinquishing that power and it ends up stabbing him. And the whole time I was watching it, I was like, man, it feels like Last Jedi watched this movie and is like, hey, that's a really good idea, because the parallels of Snoke at the end, doing that whole, like, he's telling him, like, picturing, he can read inside Kylo Ren's mind of what's happening, that he's about to kill Rey, but the whole time he's imagining it happening to Snoke, but he can't see that. And so I was just like, oh man, that's like did Last Jedi watch Gamers? Like, oh, I like that. I'm going to make a note. Cool. Let's just talk about implants, or, whatever the technology is down the road, whether it's nanocells or just a chip implant. Is there any circumstance, any situation that you would consider implants of this nature, that, and not even talking about remote control of your body, but just any kind of upgrade, so to speak?
I absolutely would. The Nanics concept, probably not so much. right? Because in the show and a few others, like I've seen some Black Mirrors, which
Right.
Black Mirror is a really great show too, talking about
So good.
possibilities in technology. That's a great one to explore. Wink, wink.
Mhm.
But it is the ability to remove it, right? The Nanics wasn't something you can just up and remove. They were cells. They were in your cortex, right? So it's not something you had the option of changing your mind on, right? And then it gave you that
Yeah.
ever present. I always have the ability to lose control. But there's like little subtle technologies there out today where you can have a chip in your hand that lets you unlock your door, right? That way it's your hand, you're there. It's just like a key fob, but it's under your skin so nobody can steal it, that kind of thing. And I think that similarly, there's implant technology they're talking about, like you brought it up earlier, that will help repair some things that your nervous system has failed to continue to let you have control of. So I think that there's no harm in leveraging technology for that. But I think as this continues, there just needs to be appropriate committees for use case validation, and watching out for those nefarious actors or potentials. But I fully embrace it to look at a more comedical side of it. It's not actually that far from possible. Futurama, the heads in the jars and stuff. But Futurama has some really interesting, funny ways of looking at how technology will be in the future and how we'll use it. But moving consciousness, I think, is a really interesting concept to me. Moving consciousness to a chip. I don't know what that's like. I can't say if I would be interested in something like that. When you get to a certain point, maybe an end does sound nice, but like it's really cool to think about the technology that might have the capability of. We're getting close to being able to see what consciousness would look like in technology, that kind of thing. And I think it's just really fascinating. So I'm not against us continuing to explore it, but I think the most important thing we can do is always challenge it to make sure that there's not enough potential for malicious activity to take place, because there's always going to be malicious people out there, even if 99% of the scenarios it's positive. We just have to watch out for those bad guys.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, whenever I think about it, the stuff that I have no problems with are, repair and maintain. Like if my brain stops talking to my legs, if I develop tremors because of a particular ailment, those kind of implants and technologies to alleviate or cure. Absolutely. Like if I lost my hearing or sight and you could restore it, absolutely, I would want that. It's anything that is, for lack of a better term, quote unquote, entertainment purposes. Like, oh, I can put this chip in my head and I can instantly download stuff, or I can, if I have a question about something, I can look it up with a thought, and it's like a thought process, so I have Google in my mind, that's the kind of stuff where it's like, no.
Well, what's bizarre about that to me is the way we leverage technology and the way they use it in the show today is it's waves, right? It's remote access, which is forms of waves. And the more and more studies, and I'm so far from an expert on this, I just enjoy being entertained with a conspiracy or a tease of technology or science every now and then. But the fact that waves is how a lot of our body responds and our mind responds to everything. Light waves, sound waves, right? Different types of waves. And I think that there's more to come on that. And it's not directly technology, it is science. But I think there's more to explore on that when it comes to that kind of influence of the way you think, the way you feel. But I already, technology is so good at listening to everything around us. I feel like I am influenced. I am becoming a sheep from time to time when I open my phone. It already knows what I've been talking about all day with my spouse, with my kids. It's bizarre.
No, absolutely. And that's the thing. Like, I have so many thoughts running around in my head that I don't want to have another question of like, is it even my thought? So yeah, I don't want that little element added on to what's already going on upstairs. But yeah, no, it's crazy. I mean, we all experience this. It's super old news, but it still catches me off guard all the time. I was on the phone with my friend he brought up The Wizard of Oz, which in my household never gets brought up. I mean, I think the last time I talked about that movie was 10 years ago, or to my kid 5 years ago. And sure enough, he brought it up because it was this whole thing about a signing, whatever. And then, yeah, guess what? Wizard of Oz stuff is showing up in my feed and everything like this. Like, come on, dude, really? It still catches me off guard all the time. Where it's like, oh, yeah, my brother mentioned that,
It's one of those things, too, where I like it sometimes because if I was talking about something I really wanted or I needed, and then all of a sudden I'm getting ads for something, and then I go check, it's got good reviews, and I'm like, oh, that was nice. It did some shopping for me. That feels nice. But at the same time, there's other parts where I'm being influenced in ways that I didn't want, didn't accept, didn't need. And so it's just, we have to have the appropriate checks and balances in to make sure that the maliciousness isn't there. And it's going to be an ongoing, I don't think it'll ever stop being able to check for that.
No, for sure. No.
I think one that would be fun, and I'd love to come back and do another one with you, but it's a next step in this conversation. It's not so much about implants, but living with technology. There's so much about androids and robots coming out in the real world right now. And so I think iRobot with Will Smith would be a great one to follow up on. So it gets me excited. And this has been such a fun topic, a fun conversation, and glad to have been, quote unquote, forced to rewatch another Gerard Butler film so that we could just kind of hash out what we thought of it and stuff.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, thanks for coming on the podcast and talking to me. And thank you for listening. If you're out there listening, please rate and subscribe us. And I want to hear from you. You can head over to thwack.com, look for Movies and Mainframes, and leave a comment. And you can always reach me at moviesandmainframes@solarwinds.com. Well, again, special thanks to Sean. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Andy. Great to be here.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for another episode. We are going to log off. And until the next time, we will catch you later. Bye, everyone.
Movies and Mainframes.